Barack Obama prepares to select his new cabinet. What do his rumoured choices suggest about foreign and economic policy in his second term? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. President Barack Obama has indicated that he'll announce the new members of his cabinet after Thanksgiving week. On her way out is the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. The most controversial name being mentioned to replace her is the current ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice. Her handling of the Benghazi attacks, which killed the US ambassador to Libya and 3 others, has placed her in an uncomfortable light. Former Democratic presidential candidate John Kerry is widely reported to be in line for Secretary of Defense. And the sudden resignation of the CIA chief, David Petraeus, earlier this month, has also left another key post for the president to consider. These appointments will suggest the direction of President Obama's foreign policy in his second term. However, some argue that the last few weeks have already provided us with a glimpse of what's to come. Vijay Prashad is Professor of International Studies at Trinity College in Connecticut. He argues that an Obama doctrine is becoming clear. I asked him to explain.
Well, it's a question of how you understand the use of American power. Every president likes to think of themselves as having a doctrine. So, crudely put, the Bush doctrine was either my way or the highway. And he would use American power willy-nilly to make that come true. The Obama doctrine in the first term seemed to indicate that it was largely a continuation of the Bush doctrine, but with a much lighter touch. He promised, in a sense, a much more robust liberal agenda in the second term. His surrogates were talking about how America was going to come in now in the Israel-Palestine conflict, how there was going to be an engagement with Asia, etc. But what we have seen already from just the first few weeks after the election is a different kind of aggressiveness, not a liberal aggressiveness, but a new kind of imperial aggressiveness. If you take the 2 important conflicts that have broken out since the election, one in the region of the Congo and the other in Gaza, in both cases, the United States has backed fully its client state. In the one case, Rwanda, in the other case, Israel. And they've backed these 2 client states fully in the United Nations, regardless of, the bulk of the world community taking the opposite position. That means there's a kind of muscular, robust position coming out where the United States is willing to utilize military force through drones, through sending armored naval carriers into the South China Sea once more. You're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of this client states being backed around the world, but something that Mr. Obama had not done so fully in the first term.
Well, that's not the narrative we're getting here in the US, at least. The narrative here is actually Hillary Clinton brokered a ceasefire between the warring parties in Gaza, and secondly, a condemnation was issued by the UN Security Council for the seizure of Goma. That is smart diplomacy, surely.
It's a very interesting diplomacy because they were able to, in a sense, control the narrative. Susan Rice, during the outbreak of the bombing of Gaza, twice in the UN Security Council made it clear that the United States would block any attempt to condemn Israel if at the same time the Security Council wasn't fully going to condemn Hamas. In other words, if there was no proportional response from the United Nations, the so-called Negroponte doctrine was going to come into effect. And the Negroponte doctrine is that the United States is going to prevent any criticism of Israel in the UN. So that was how she dealt with the question of Gaza, twice blocking the United Nations from putting out any kind of statement. You'll remember that when the Russians vetoed a Security Council statement on Syria, Susan Rice said outside the chamber that any blood spilled now is going to be on the hands of the Russians. Well, by that standard, I'm afraid, Susan Rice has very wet hands. On the question of Goma and the Congo, when the Rwandan-backed M23 rebel group entered Congo, came up to Goma, the French put out a draft statement which seemed to condemn both M23 and the Rwandan government. The United States came in there and scrubbed clean that draft. So when UN Resolution 2076 was finally passed, there was no mention of Rwanda there, despite the fact that the Security Council had discussed the role of Rwanda, and despite the fact that all UN agencies are of the view that Rwanda is completely implicated in the invasion of the Congo. There is no condemnation. So they're playing very clever diplomacy in terms of, controlling the narrative of what they're doing. But the deeds are quite different from their words.
But should we be surprised that the US is seeming to carry on pretty much as it always has in what it perceives to be its strategic interest? I mean, should we have dared to think of any different actions from the United States?
Well, this is the problem, in a sense, of the Obama presidency. Having had George W. Bush for 8 years, taken the United States to a certain position where people said, well, it's always going to be this your way or the highway, it's always going to be American primacy, etc. The problem of the Obama administration was it promised to walk away from the precipice of US primacy or nothing. And it promised to engage with multilateralism as a way forward for the world. Of course, that promise was enough, I think, to befuddle a very large number of people across the planet. Obama's speech in Cairo was received very warmly in the Arab world at the time. But the deeds are not quite what those words promised. And therefore, there's now, I think, an even greater cynicism outside the world. And as well, I think there'll be a problem for US diplomacy in this second term because it's unwilling or unable to come to terms with a simple fact. The age of US primacy is over. The age of multilateralism is here. And I think American diplomacy is not prepared to engage with the fact of multilateral, world affairs. Not prepared at all.
Joining me to further discuss the foreign policy implications of Barack Obama's upcoming cabinet appointments is former White House official Hillary Mount Leverett. Hillary, then, Susan Rice, still the name that most people are talking about. In fact, in some ways, it seems her position has been enhanced by the Benghazi furor. Did you get that sense?
Well, there does seem to be some play by President Obama to try to stand tough and show that he's not going to be bullied by Congress. But it's hard to see how he, like on many other issues, can follow through with that. He keeps doing this. He says Gaddafi can't stand, and then his plan for backing that up gets pretty muddied. Bashar al-Assad can't stand, and the plan for that gets pretty muddied. And now it's that Susan Rice has got to be the one put in, and he doesn't really have a plan to back that up. If he can't get Senator McCain and Senator Graham, two critically important senators, to back down and allow her nomination to go forward, he's got a problem, and we see this periodically in how he handles.
And throughout this discussion, your argument has always been there are questions to be asked about Benghazi, just not
Absolutely.
the ones that McCain is asking.
Right, and that McCain can't ask because he's complicit in this policy. The critical question that needs to be asked, and I want to say it over and over and over again because people's lives were taken over this: did the United States arm, fund, train, and support, either directly or through our so-called allies, the very people who killed the U.S. ambassador to Libya and the other Americans who died with him? Nobody in Washington asks this question, even though these people's lives were taken.
And it's a key question, particularly if she is to become Secretary of State, given her proclivity for intervention around the world.
Yes. It's a critical issue because the idea, whether you're neoconservative or neoliberal interventionist, as I would put Susan Rice in that category, each of these camps supports armed military intervention by the United States in the internal affairs of other countries. They do it for slightly different reasons, but the main strategic purpose is for the United States to pursue dominance. This was the major grand strategy that the United States adopted in the wake of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Susan Rice has been part of this from the beginning. When she was in the Clinton administration in the early 1990s, she's been part of it from the get-go. So is one of the other names mentioned for the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense position, John Kerry. He's also been part of it. So is Tom Donilon. They all were part of, participated in, agreed to, and pushed this idea of the American pursuit of dominance after the collapse of the Soviet Union, rather than balancing, rather than taking states as they are, as they're rising, dealing with them that way, and balancing them together.
But what about the narrative I often see in the New York Times and elsewhere that now President Obama is keen to withdraw a little bit and has a more realist view of the world? Is that just complete nonsense then?
There's just no evidence of it if you look at the record. I mean, as soon as he's elected, the first thing he does, and his plan beforehand, is to go to Asia, to go to countries that China cares deeply about, and to go there and to goad China to take the United States on. We're putting more troops into Asia. We're pushing the Chinese in ways that have no strategic logic, in issues and in areas that have no real strategic value for the United States. The only reason we're doing this is to make sure the Chinese understand that under President Obama, we will not tolerate them being the power in control to dominate Asia, because we still are the global superpower with global dominance. That's a critical message that Obama is pushing right from the beginning of his new administration.
So given the expansion of the CIA's role in foreign policy and an active killing in foreign policy, that's going to be a pivotal symbol of what Obama plans to do. Who are we hearing for the CIA post?
Well, it is a critical decision that we didn't really see, wasn't there for the general public to see even 2 or 3 weeks ago, because General Petraeus was, for most in Washington, a given that he would continue in his position. And General Petraeus has been, I think, what Obama wants and what the liberal interventionists want, which is to make the CIA a corollary of the Defense Department, to use secret funding, open-ended, unended, unchecked, unaccountable funding to pursue military objectives, to use drones, covert war, cyber warfare against other countries without anybody knowing, asking any questions. The president was very comfortable with that, very happy with that. Now, with the sudden disappearance of Petraeus, he has the chance to appoint someone who could actually counsel him how to see the world, how to understand profound changes that are going on in the world. So great thinkers about the use of American power could be brought in. Someone like Joe Nye from Harvard University, for example, who really understands and has looked at soft power and the evolution of power, could be brought in. The chances of that, I think, are nil. Nobody's really talking about that seriously. The big debate, of course, is between John Brennan, President Obama's current counterterrorism advisor within the White House, the father of drone warfare, the champion of drone warfare, of our so-called counterterrorism strategy, which includes killing American citizens with no due process of law. The big choice is between him and Jane Harman, who is a member of the House of Representatives on the Intelligence Committee, and who may be a slightly nicer face to essentially the same type of unabashed, unequivocal, unaccountable use of cyber warfare, drones, and other kinds of secret warfare as a corollary to the Defense Department.
So what do you expect from the second term then?
I think the evidence so far is more of the same. I mean, President Obama, I think his big foreign policy test challenge came almost immediately with the Israeli military attack in Gaza. And immediately, President Obama, through his own words and his surrogates, was that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. Something that I think most of the world, not many Americans here in Washington, but most of the world looked at as bizarre, from another planet, that Israel has the right to defend itself while it's lobbing thousands of missiles into Gaza and killing so disproportionately people there. But that was his immediate reaction, and he needs to do that because the United States, with Israel, the United States strategically continues to see Israel as an asset, not because it makes our relations with the Arab world easier, actually because it makes it harder. It keeps Arabs down, it keeps Muslims down, and it allows the United States to continue to pursue dominance, particularly in the Middle East, and even more broadly than that.
Another big decision for Barack Obama is who will take over as Secretary of the Treasury. The appointment of the outgoing Secretary, Timothy Geithner, who has close ties to the financial industry, was widely criticized by those who were hoping that President Obama would break Wall Street's hold on the position. But if the rumors of his potential successor are true, they're set for yet more disappointment. The odds-on favorite is Obama's current Chief of Staff, Jack Lew, who was a former executive of Citigroup, the Wall Street giant. Also mentioned for the post is Erskine Bowles, seen here on the left, the co-chair of the Simpson-Bowles Commission on the U.S. deficit. Joining me now are from New York, Richard Wolff, Emeritus Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, And from Madison, Wisconsin, John Nichols, Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine. So, John, first of all, then, we're hearing these names being bandied about. The two key names we often hear, Jack Lew, Erskine Bowles. Who are these people?
Well, Jack Lew is a White House insider. He's somebody who has had various roles within the Obama White House. The president knows him very, very well, and if he is given the Treasury Secretary post, it will be a signal from the Obama White House that they really want sort of a pure continuity from where they've been at, that they want somebody in there who is going to be very, very tight with the president. Erskine Bowles is a different player. Erskine Bowles is someone who was appointed as a longtime Democratic insider to be the key player on the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was to come up with a response to the deficit. Bowles is actually a Clinton man. He harkens back to Bill Clinton's White House, where at one point he was chief of staff. He is not as close to Obama, and you should remember that when handed the opportunity to fully embrace Simpson-Bowles, this plan for deficit reduction via some cuts in entitlements and also tax cuts for corporations, Barack Obama said no. He rejected that. So taking Bowles in would be a much more significant signal that Obama has moved toward more of a deficit hawk position.
Well, I mean, John, that's the point. I mean, a lot of names are being thrown around, and you know, it could be someone completely different. I mean, there's obviously a lot of journalists who are desperate to fill copy. There's an element of that too. But is any name being bandied around who might argue, hang on, we won this argument, let's concentrate on jobs and inequality now, because that's what the economy needs?
It's intriguing that some people have suggested that Ben Bernanke should be shifted over to the position because he actually has at times shown a minimum of concern for people who are in dire financial straits. But that's a humorous suggestion, I think, rather than one that's likely to happen. We are not hearing the names of economists and economic players who would be serious proponents of a we take care of our own progressive political message. The tragedy of it is that these people do exist. Paul Krugman, the New York Times columnist and Nobel Prize winner, Robert Reich, the Clinton administration Secretary of Labor. These are the kinds of folks that you could put in the position, A, send a very strong signal, but also have somebody who knows the economy and has good ideas about how to act. Unfortunately, I don't see much indication that that's where the Obama administration is headed.
Professor Wolff, are you hopeful then that Barack Obama will surprise us in the second term? What are you gleaning from the parameters of the economic discussion right now for the second term?
I don't expect much of anything. I expect continuity, more or less. I believe Obama was surprised, as most of us were, that he was able to win as decisively as he did, that the more extreme right-wing conservative Republicans lost as often as they did. It would have been nice to imagine that this gave him the space to reconsider this weak austerity program that he's been following in his entire first administration, and which nearly cost him this election because it has been so unsuccessful for the vast majority of people. But when I hear rumors that he's trying to mend fences with Wall Street, that he's considering these kinds of people, it all amounts to indications that there is no basic change, that he doesn't feel he can or should change a policy, even though it has meant that this economic crisis has lasted longer, hurt more people more than anyone foresaw back in 2007.
And yet, John Nichols, when I spoke to you a few weeks ago, I think it was at one of the presidential debates, you were suggesting that some in the progressive caucus might be a bit scared about an Obama second term, about what he might do to the social safety net and other things. And yet today you were suggesting, well, actually, no, some of them are more optimistic. What are they basing that optimism on, do you think?
Well, the optimism is based on something that Professor Wolff just referenced. President Obama was reelected far more comfortably than anyone, even inside Obama's inner circle, expected. And so it was a very, very good night for the Democrats. And some of the progressives have come to the conclusion that A, they've got the people on their side. That's a good starting point. And B, that President Obama himself may have gotten some of the message. President Obama's post-election meetings with labor unions, with progressives, have been, across the board, suggested to be more encouraging than any meetings they had had with him before. And finally, just to close the circle on this, there seems to be a sense that President Obama's bargaining position is simply better than that of the dwindling Republicans in the House, the group that he's going to have to deal with. At the end of the day, the real question is simply one now of which side blinks. And if President Obama holds firm, then progressives believe he actually can get a much better deal than expected. So that's where the shift has occurred. But I will emphasize to you that we're talking about the big deal stuff here, because if President Obama were to appoint, say, an Erskine Bowles as Secretary of the Treasury, that would cause all of the alarm bells to go off, all of the red flags to go back up. So we're in a sort of a tentative place of comfort, not one of complete relaxation.
Richard Wolff, I mean, does that at least give you a tentative place of comfort, Professor Wolff?
No, I must say, I remember when Obama kept Gates in as defense secretary in the first term, what it signaled, the choice of Geithner so close to the Paulson who preceded him. I don't see an Obama in a position or with a history that would make him fundamentally change his policy. It seems to me that consistently throughout, with the occasional populist rhetoric that really appeared to be no more than rhetoric, he's committed to staying the course unless there's another Obama that none of us have seen, at least in public, do anything of these kinds. My fear is that he will continue and that he will, in fact, if not with Erskine Bowles, then with someone else like that, reach a so-called compromise. You might call it austerity light when compared to countries like Spain or Greece, but nonetheless a program whose fundamental function is to shift the costs of this crisis and the costs of bailing out the banks and corporations onto the mass of people by diminishing the quality of the programs they can get from the government they just elected, and I think that's a tragedy.
Professor Wolff, we only have like 2 minutes left or so, but we keep hearing from the unions and we keep hearing from progressive groups that we're not going to make that mistake again. This time we will keep organized and mobilized and make sure, because President Obama does. They seem to react to progressive pressure as well as right-wing pressure. What should they be fighting for right now?
Well, I mean, on the 14th of November, we saw, for the first time in modern history, a stunning, coordinated action across every European country with hundreds, millions perhaps, of people in coordinated demonstrations saying that there will be no toleration for the kinds of austerity that half the countries of Europe are trying to implement. We have nothing like that here. We have a labor movement that is not showing any muscle at all in a comparable way. Why should we believe that the president, who doesn't have to face, at least yet, that kind of statement, mobilizing public opinion, will take steps that are different from what he has done all along?
John Nichols, just to close it, it all depends on what President Obama believes. It's something we've constantly asked, even if people seem to be concentrating on what Mitt Romney believed during the campaign. We always wondered, actually, isn't what Obama believes more nebulous, perhaps? Do we know economically what he believes? Does he believe the social safety net is important and shouldn't be broken up, for example?
Sure, he does. There's simply no question.
But therefore, that's a red line, and there's no debate about it.
Well, but let me complete the thought, though. That's the problem. The problem is not does he believe in that, but does he believe he can win the political fights for those programs? In his first term, it was absolutely clear that he did not have faith that what he believed in, what he valued, was a politically viable program. He was wrong, and he made a lot of mistakes. He undermined his own success by lacking confidence. The only question now is not what he believes in ideologically or economically. It is, has he grown in confidence? Does he have the confidence to fight for the programs that he knows are good programs, he knows are necessary programs. If he does, he can win those fights.
John Nichols, thank you very much. Professor Wolf, thank you too. And that's it from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.